Every day you put your life on the line to protect and serve. Who's protecting you? United Badges Insurance Services operates as a dedicated resource for the first responder public safety community. Serving thousands of first responders, United Badges offers a wide range of products including commercial insurance, group accident and health insurance, and personal insurance such as auto, home, renters, rental properties, vacation properties, boat, motorcycle, RVs, flood, and umbrella. United Badges serves active and retired public safety personnel, public safety agencies, public safety associations, public safety support businesses, and public safety families and friends. Experience the United Badges difference. Call 800-566-5990 or visit unitedbadges.com to request your free insurance quote today. United Badges Insurance Services is a proud strategic partner of the Florida Deputy Sheriff's Association. Applicants are individually underwritten by each respective insurance carrier and subject to insurance policy terms and conditions. Not available in all states. Promotional material for descriptive purposes only. Welcome to The Tactical Pause, the official podcast of the Florida Deputy Sheriff's Association. I'm John Creamer, Deputy Executive Director of FDSA. Each episode, I sit down with law enforcement thought leaders to tackle critical issues shaping the future of public safety. Together, we'll explore key topics that empower law enforcement professionals to navigate challenges, lead with confidence, and advance their careers. Take a pause, gain valuable insights, and lead your career with purpose. Thanks for listening. Joining me today is my good friend, Bonnie Eckman. Bonnie's out in California. Bonnie is a sensory therapist, and I'm delighted that she's on the show today. She has helped me in my journey along the way. So before we get started, a lot of what we do on A Tactical Pause is about leadership and resiliency and finishing your career strong. And about every other episode, we do something about mental health and mental strength and resiliency. So that's why I asked Bonnie to be on today. So Bonnie, tell everybody about you. How did you become a sensory therapist, and what is that?
Yeah, thanks, John. It's good to see you. Thanks for having me on. John is one of my favorite humans. So this is a real pleasure for me to be on the other end of this. So my background's in occupational therapy, which is, if you think about it, it's how you occupy your time. And a lot of times in wellness, we talk about things not to do, but we very rarely talk about what we should be doing. And so that's where that started about 15 years ago. And about 5 years into my career, I noticed that first responders and military respond differently to their senses and how that affects both their hypervigilance and PTSD. And so I have been working in that realm for the last 10 years and after action out in California now. So I get to spend time teaching groups and one-on-one sessions with people who come through who have PTSD, trauma, and are first responders.
Okay, and for our audience, our listening audience, if you go to the Florida Deputy Sheriff's Association webpage, fldeputysheriffs.org, and then under resources, there's a tab that says trauma resources, and one of them is after action. So that's how I met Bonnie. I went to California to deal with, truthfully, with my PTSD and some things that have happened along my life, and I'm not ashamed to say that, and that's where I met Bonnie, and that's where I discovered sensory therapy. I really didn't know anything about it other than as a child, if I was hyperactive, one of my parents would be like, go to your room and just sit in your bed and take deep breaths and think about things. So that was the closest I ever got to it.
Probably didn't work out so well either, did it?
No, it didn't.
Yeah.
So how did you get your toe into that? I mean, that's a niche within a niche, right? I mean, so being an occupational therapist and then being one for law enforcement and military and then one in this, stream, how did you fall into that?
Yeah, I was seeing a lot of the similar things that you see with someone's nervous system that responds differently, right? So there's neurodivergence that have a little bit differency, and then people are familiar with autism and how that has sensory differences, but no one was looking at how the sensory differences changed when you have PTSD or hypervigilance. And there's such a big difference in that, and I felt like we were failing so many of our first responders who finally went and got help. Such a big part of that is they use mind over matter in treatments and in therapy, which is great. But if your nervous system is stuck on hypervigilance, you don't have access to the logical part of your brain. So even walking through your trauma, which can be helpful, isn't going to be helpful if you're not able to self-regulate. And so I was seeing people get help, and I was seeing first responders really get into mental health, which was such a big thing from when I first started, where there was hardly anything about mental health. And So they would finally come in and get help, and they weren't getting the help that they deserved because there was a missing piece of you have to be able to self-regulate and calm your nervous system before you can work on anything that is logical.
Yeah. So, a couple of things. So, I know that we're going to talk about all the senses, and I think there's technically 8, right?
Nice. Yes, there is.
Okay. So I only knew about 5 until about a year ago, but those 5 senses were engaged. As a patrol deputy or patrol officer, no matter what the weather was, I always had the window partially down. I wanted to be able to hear what was going on as I was patrolling my zone. So all my senses were engaged all the time for a 10-hour. Well, I started with an 8-hour shift at 10, and then when I left, it was a 12-hour shift. So you're right. You're constantly seeking input. It was like when the original Terminator came out. There's a point of view from the Terminator's vision, and his computer was reading all this data. And that's the way it is in law enforcement. All of your senses are engaged, and you're constantly reading data. Even when you don't think you are, you're writing a report, you're still bringing in this data. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is we white knuckle it. So I ran out of runway. The things I did to mind over matter didn't work anymore. I thought I could pull off like a beautiful mind and think my way out of some things, and it didn't work. So talk about those things. Like, how does a first responder, regardless if it's police, fire, EMS, or corrections, how do they get into that hypervigilant mode? And then what can you do to help them break that cycle and reset?
Yeah, I love that. And I love how you brought the Terminator in. That is really what's happening in your brain 24/7. So even though we're not consciously thinking about what we're looking at or having the window down so we can hear, it is a piece of your brain is constantly running all the time. And what happens is when you leave that moment, your brain doesn't know how to turn that off. And so that becomes a problem. So then you go home or you go out into public and you're still using, you're listening to every sound and having a hard time with a conversation. You're watching doors, you're watching people's movements and eye movements, and your brain is basically getting exhausted just by sensory overload. So one of the main things is using those 8 senses, which I'm so proud of you that you remembered there's 8. Really using all of those to help your nervous system self-regulate. It's one thing to tell your brain, hey, stop thinking about stuff and be engaged with my family or my friends. That's a whole nother piece, though, if your nervous system and your 8 senses are constantly tracking all information around you at all time. Really hard to be present in that moment. So learning things with all 8 senses can be really helpful, especially after a critical incident or during transition times when you're leaving work before you go to your next thing. It takes a human about 15 to 20 minutes to acclimate to just about any change. And so if you're on shift, like you said, 8, 10, 12 hours, it's going to take 15, 20 minutes for your nervous system to reset before heading to the next, part of your life, right? So going from being on shift to home or to friends or grocery shopping even. I know a lot of first responders don't even like being out in public, and we joke all the time that it's because we hate people, and that's not really what it is. It really is a sensory overload and your brain feeling like it's processing too much information. So learning how to find 1 or 2 senses that help you reset can make things so much easier, and it's something that can be done by you without any help and figuring that out. So I'll give you just one easy example.
Okay.
Smell is the strongest link to memory. It's also one that we don't talk about a lot, but for first responders, it's a big thing. If I mention Vicks, John, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Oh, an autopsy. Or
Yeah,
crime
absolutely.
Scene.
Yeah. So that science was solid and they were using it incorrectly. So the whole point of putting Vicks on is so that you don't smell the autopsy, right? That smell is terrible. And you put on something else. The problem is when you don't switch it up and you don't know how it works or what you're doing. Now, if I put on Vicks, you're going to have that same recall memory, and it's still going to have the same feeling that went with seeing an autopsy. If we are able to start helping first responders understand how their sensory system works, I think it will help cut down a lot on PTSD responses. So let's say that you're going to a call and you know it's going to be a dramatic call, right? You know there's going to be a lot of smells that no one wants to smell. Maybe putting on some coconut chapstick underneath your nose would be more helpful than Vicks. And other times, maybe using Vicks and then switching it up. I'll tell a quick story. I was working with a police officer who had been in the field for, I want to say 10 years, and he ended up going to a bombing, which he had never been to before. His main coping skill was going to the shooting range, which is a great coping skill. However, when he went to the bombing, it was the first time he'd ever been to one. It was devastating. And when I met him, he had been 6 months since he'd been to the shooting range or done any kind of self-care, because everywhere he went, he could smell black powder. It didn't matter if it was a shooting range or elsewhere. And so at that point, he had no extra coping skills. So one of the things that I talk about a lot is after any kind of, when I say critical incidents, anything that feels like it's emotionally hard for you to hold, right? If it's associated
crisis
with
is
smell.
self-defined, right?
Yeah, exactly. There is no right or wrong. One thing, anything that feels personal is going to be that way. Anything that's new, just depending on if you're having a bad day, that can change whether or not it's a crisis. So after having any kind of crisis, shaving your nose hairs, washing your nose out with soap, and putting on a smell that you really like. It can be chapstick, it can be a perfume or cologne, it can be pretty much anything you want that helps your brain not log that smell for as long.
So you brought up like 10 things. I hope I can remember at least 3 of them. What I used to do later in my career when I was coming home, even when I was an administrator, was I would take the long way home. Right. I would take the long way home. I try to change up which way I went, and I would slowly start turning the police radio down and taking some deep breaths and be like, okay, I'm going home. I'm safe. And then I would sit in the car for a few minutes in the driveway, and then come in and try to leave my uniform in the garage, almost like it's on this side of the threshold that doesn't belong. So I would do some of those things. The other thing you brought up is we think all people are assholes at times, or they think we're assholes at times. Right. And that comes from Dr. Gilmartin's book, right? Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. And then the last thing I was going to say was about the smell. So good and bad, like to this day, if anybody knows me, they know my dad was the greatest hero that ever walked the planet of the earth for me. He was a firefighter, and anytime I smell leaves burning, that's my dad, right? To this day. Yep. And he's been gone for a little bit now, but back in the day, he was a firefighter from 66 to 96, and he always came home smelling like smoke, even if he had showered at the fire station and came home and had a few cigarettes on the way home, or stopped and had a VO and 7 at a bar somewhere. He still smelled like smoke no matter what he did. And when I smell that, I just have the fondest memories of him. And then the mustache thing, the reason I shaved my mustache, I wore one for years. I wish somebody had told me how ridiculous I looked back then. But I shaved it after a crime scene, and somebody had decomped in a bathtub, and all I could smell was dead guy soup in my mustache, and that's the reason it came off. So anyway, help me unpack some of those things.
Yeah, let's start with your transition. I love that. I love that you took the long way. That's not you avoiding home. That is really giving your brain the time it needs, and your nervous system the time it needs to unravel everything. If you can turn on something that is calming for you, and that can be death metal, it can be the sound of the tires going, it can be anything, but whatever feels like it helps you transition from everything you already hypervigilantly have in your brain. It's kind of like opening up your head and just letting things fall out in that 15, 20 minutes. Okay. So I think that's great. I love that you talked about taking off your uniform in your garage and getting prepared beforehand. Tactile, which is touch, right, is one of our senses. And that is a big part of our well-being. I joke all the time with people, what if you were wearing a bikini or a wedding dress? You would feel different, which you would. And that's part of the reason of having a uniform. You put that uniform on and your mind feels that tactile input and starts to change with it. So taking time before you get home, to let your brain empty, then changing the input through your body, right? Changing that touch is going to be really helpful. And then I love that you still think burning leaves and reminds you of your dad. Let me ask you this question.
Sure.
When you smell burning leaves, you have a recall of your dad, but what does it feel like?
Safety, love, warmth.
Yeah, and I can see you smiling, right? And it's that natural breath, like that natural breath of relaxation. So it's one thing to tell your brain or your body, take a deep breath, which is still a logic piece. It's a whole nother thing to smell something that you love and have your nervous system respond immediately. And that's a beautiful way, but also going back to guy bathtub soup, It's going to happen that same way. You smell anything that's even remotely close to it, and your brain is going to follow that emotion. So it's not just about using our senses for mental health and being able to change and always feel good, but it's also about knowing what is going to create more emotion in your body than you want. I had a client of mine who had been through every type of first responder. When I met him, I asked if he was just collecting trauma for fun, because it sounds like he might have been. But he had a moment where he put a ham in an oven for Easter and fell asleep on the couch waiting for the ham to be done. And the ham had boiled over. And he said the next thing he remembered from that moment, he remembers sleeping and then waking up on the front lawn with his kids and his wife under his arms, covering them up. So that obviously isn't the same smell, but it was enough that even during his sleep, it was able to, as you know, I don't like the word triggered. It was able to activate his nervous system, and then he just reacts. Yeah. And I think that can feel so powerless when you have a job and a responsibility that is so powerful and so full of responsibility. To feel like you're no longer in charge of that, I think is sad. It's not something I feel like our first responders should have to go through.
Especially when you are used to being in charge of things.
Exactly.
Right? And in charge of your own emotions. So.
Right. And then not feeling like in charge of that. I know my brother-in-law suffers with PTSD, and he is very big into not going out because of that reason, and not being able, he hasn't spent the time it takes to understand what those activations are. And just really quick, I want to touch on why I don't say triggered. Bothers me because it sounds silly at this point. Too many people are using it incorrectly. And triggered feels like something you can pull or not pull. What I'm talking about is when your nervous system has an activation, meaning that your body and brain are going to do what they need to without thought. Okay. And that changes things, right? Because if you're triggered, a lot of times, especially, I don't even know what to call it, so I won't say anything mean at all, but let's say some people who are using it frivolously and just saying, oh, that triggered me. What they're talking about is a thought that they don't like. What I'm talking about with first responders and military is activation. Your nervous system and your brain went offline to go ahead and do whatever is necessary to get through that next moment. And you're not in control of that. And that's not a place that most first responders want to feel like they're in.
I'm really glad that you discussed the phrase and the differences between the two, because you're right. I think triggered is a probably overused in our vernacular these days. And you're right. And when you say activated, to me, it's almost like your SWAT team's being activated or this emergency system's being activated. So you're right. It's almost like there's no choice.
Yeah. So. And you don't have access to that logic, right? Yeah. And so when you say take a deep breath, that is great, but that can be really hard to do when your nervous system's activated. If you had something you could carry with you that smelled like burnt leaves, think how quickly your nervous system would be able to react to that in any situation, and naturally you take that deep breath.
That's a good point. So you mentioned that smell was the strongest
link to memory.
Yeah, okay. Yep. What are some of the other ones?
We have 8, like you said. So everyone hopefully knows the first 5, right? We learn them in kindergarten. So there's sight, sound, smell, touch, taste. There's 3 more that most people don't need to memorize, but they are part of the same survival system. So a lot of times we talk about sensory and we talk about it in the kindergarten terms. But if you look at it from a biological and neurospace, sensory really is our main survival skill. So as humans, we're born with 2 instincts, which is don't die. And how do we not die? All of human history was to interpret our senses. So we know the 5, but we don't know how deeply or how ingrained that is into our behavior. So the other 3, I'll tell you, like I said, you don't have to memorize them, but it's important to know that they're part of that survival system. And when you think of sensory, that's what I hope people think of is this is your survival. This is telling that subconscious what to do. So one is called vestibular, which is inner ear and balance. So I joke often if someone is sitting in a rocking chair, is that going to fully regulate their nervous system? Maybe, maybe not. But one part of your survival system has to understand, okay, well, I cannot be in an emergency or running from a bear, as I like to pretend every emergency is. is everyone's running from a bear at any given time.
Right.
You can't be running from a bear and be sitting in a rocking chair feeling that movement of back and forth.
Okay.
So it has one signal to your survival part of your brain saying, we might be running from a bear, right? Having that activated nervous system. But one signal is feeling the movement of rocking back and forth. And that movement of repetitive slow rocking is going to tell your nervous system that you, by default or reverse engineered, you can't be running from a bear. So that's one sense.
Okay.
The other one is proprioception. And proprioception is deep pressure and movement in your joints. And I know there is a lot of policemen out there who use to put your finger in 1 inch in front of your nose, right? And have the drunk driving test.
Yeah.
Which is always fun when I'm trying to explain this, because every time I'm like, how did you know where your finger was? Everyone always says, oh, muscle memory. No, not quite. So it really is your body's ability to gauge pressure and movement in your joints. And the purpose of that is learning how to work through an emotion. There's 2 ways to work through an emotion. You can work through it mentally or physically. And our society has gotten really big that supposedly we can do everything mentally. But I don't know about you. I've never mentally been able to unanger myself.
No. Usually it has to run its course, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the ways to make that faster is literally tightening up your muscles. If you ever look at a 3-year-old kid who doesn't want to play on a swing set, their whole body, their hands are clenched, their teeth are clenched, their guts are clenched, and they're like, I don't even like the swings. And they hold that for about 5, 6, 7 seconds. And then all of a sudden they're like, just kidding, let's play on the swings.
Okay.
Because they're
kind of
working
like we
through
used to
it
call it
physically.
bracing, right? We used to
It
call it
is.
like bracing, right? Okay.
Yeah, it is. And that would help you walk through that so much faster than just trying to mentally. If you hold on to let's say you're driving and you're holding on to your steering wheel really tight with your hands, you clench your teeth and you're pressing your left foot into where there's no longer a clutch for most of us, and you hold that, even if you're still breathing, which you should be, your body's going to get exhausted within, I don't know, depending on how strong you are, in a couple of minutes at most. At that point, when you let go, your whole body does a relaxation of, and your muscles relax. You've given your brain reverse engineering very clear sign using proprioception of that's what it feels like when you're stressed. And when you let go, reverse engineering says, I guess you're less stressed. So it really is teaching your brain in real time how to handle each emotion in the moment versus holding on to it and trying to think it through.
Okay.
So that's one of them. Proprioception is huge. I'm going to throw this in there so you can remind me later, but that's also why I use high chews often.
Okay.
Some people use gum, but we'll get back to that.
Okay.
The very last sense is called interoception. Interoception is your ability to gauge hunger, thirst, hot, cold, bathroom, and time. And the reason that this is so important is because I'm going to use the analogy of being activated and you're running from this bear.
Right.
If you're running from a bear, how helpful is it for your interoception to tell you that you're hungry?
Not.
Thirsty?
No.
Hot, cold? You might go to the bathroom, but you did not make that choice.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? You're running from the bear and you might have gone to the bathroom, but it's not because you knew.
Yeah. Subconsciously, your body's lightening the load, right? So you can run a little faster.
Exactly. It's all based on that survival. So anytime your nervous system's activated, it has to turn off your interoception. So once interoception turns off, you can, like you said, lighten your load. You can focus on the one thing, which is running from the bear. The problem is because first responders run so fast, meaning like your brain is just constantly going and processing, and you're busy. Just in general, you do not have enough downtime. Your brain is over-processing this, and you forget to go to the bathroom. You forget to get a drink of water. You forget to eat. And we don't think anything of it. We're like, oh, well, I'm not going to die. But according to your nervous system, you just told it to turn off all of its interoception, which to the survival part says that you are prepping for an emergency. So let's say you've had a 9-hour shift and you haven't gone to the bathroom and you haven't eaten and you haven't got a drink of water. And you're not thinking it's really a big deal because you'll do that when you get home. Your nervous system is saying, okay, are we ignoring this sense, which is our 8th sense? Are we ignoring it? Well, I guess that means we're getting ready for an emergency. So you're kind of sitting there activating your nervous system over and over, going, get ready, get ready, get ready, get ready. And it does this for 9 hours. And then all of a sudden everything becomes an emergency, right? And that's where it's like, tuna fish salad. I hate tuna fish, right? And then they're freaking out about something that doesn't feel authentic. And that's not what you're mad about, but that's what boiled over.
Okay.
And that really is part of that interoception. So something as simple as getting a drink of water, having something small to eat, and taking time to go to the bathroom can really help reset your nervous system and kick it out of that activation.
I gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense why it seemingly could be so simple and somebody loses their stack on it. But it's not something so simple. It's a culmination, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So what would you recommend for first responders? I mean, what would you recommend? Is there a lab? Is there a room that you could do? I mean, you use after action as an example, the sensory room.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sensory room, you can make a very expensive big sensory room, but sensory room it can be really anything, and it can be in your squad car. It can be in the ambulance. It really is about taking your 8 senses and figuring out what helps calm your nervous system. So I'll just use an example. Let's say that you close your eyes and now you have a lack of sight for just a second. You smell burning leaves and you have that feeling and you smell that. And then you have a little bit of just slight movement of kind of just, if it's either, it can be slight rocking, it can be bouncing your knee, just any kind of extra movement. Maybe you've clenched your fists and your jaw for a minute and you've let that go. Add in some taste. High chews are great for frustration. High chews do 2 things. It's the candy, which is lovely also because it's candy.
Yeah.
But the strongest joint in your body is your jaw. So let's say you're really frustrated and you're like, okay, I need to reset before I head home. And you do exactly what you did. And you pull over for a minute, you close your eyes, you turn on a sound that you like, you pick a smell that you like, you put in a high chew or 2 and eat that. So anytime we're frustrated, we'll clench our jaw. It's just normally like especially someone saying something, and let's say the public is telling you how to do your job, which never happens, but let's pretend it does. And you're listening and you're not going to do anything, but you're literally clenching your jaw being like, shut up, right? That's your strongest joint is your jaw. So if you eat 2 or 3 high chews back to back, it's going to exhaust your jaw. Reverse engineering says that once your jaw's relaxed, you're less stressed out. So it's really about stacking all of these. So going through sight, and maybe sometimes that's just a lack of having your eyes open. Having a small blue light or calming space in your home is huge. If you can put in like a little space where you get to control the lighting. So color changing light bulbs are so cheap now. Same with any kind of LEDs. So you change the lighting, you change the sound, you put on a smell. You can use a diffuser, you can use a candle, you can use a room spray, right? You have your high chews. You can do a warhead, which a warhead candy. Warheads are not magic, but they are a good loving bitch slap. If you get stuck in a thought or an emotion and you can't get out, having a warhead or 2 back to back is going to be so overwhelming to your senses that it's going to kick you out of that thought. So having these things having access to it is helpful. After Action has done a great job with putting sensory rooms or decompression spaces in multiple facilities, whether it's police, sheriff, EMS, fire, 911 centers, so that people have access while they're at work, but also creating one at home is really easy and inexpensive. And keeping something small in your car even makes a huge difference. And then doing it on a regular basis. But taking that 15 or 20 minutes to spend some time letting your nervous system relax.
And we'll be right back. SaferWatch and law enforcement. SaferWatch is a powerful tool that enhances public safety by improving communication between law enforcement and the community it serves. Through the SaferWatch platform, agencies can send real-time emergency and non-emergency alerts, keeping residents and visitors informed about critical incidents, safety advisories, and community updates. Additionally, SaferWatch allows the public to report crime tips, suspicious activities, and threats, providing law enforcement with valuable intelligence. SaferWatch tips have led to the prevention of school shootings, stopped sexual predators, caught wanted fugitives and burglary suspects, and has even prevented suicides. This easy-to-use two-way communication tool ensures faster response times and helps protect the community proactively. By empowering both citizens and law enforcement, SaferWatch fosters a safer, more connected community. For more information, visit saferwatchapp.com or download the free SaferWatch app on iOS or Android. Now back to the show. So do maybe just a short TED Talk about what an ideal, like if you had plenty of money and space, what would a good sensory room look like? And then compare that to the back of an ambulance or a police car or something like that.
Perfect. Yeah, so an ideal sensory room, you're going to have it full of lighting that has multiple colors, right? So you have the lighting, maybe some LED lights on top. You have some different LED lights on the bottom, so there's contrast. It has surround sound. It has at least one diffuser, so you can pick your smell. It's going to have multiple movement, whether it's a swing or a rocking chair, ideally both. Somewhere really comfortable that's soft to lay down. So a really thick rug that is, I like the fake rabbit fur is really soft, so you can lay on that. Having a weighted blanket is a big thing. Having fidgets. A fidget really is just anything that helps you keep your mind a little extra busy, right? So something as small as, I know a lot of people play with I play with my wedding ring often. And just something as small as that is helping regulate your nervous system because it's taking some input to use. So, and then having the Warheads high chews, and you can have whatever you want that's super chewy, whatever you want that's super overwhelming to your sensory system. I know some people use wasabi peas or black licorice.
Yeah.
Having that in the sensory room, and then being able to have movement of like lighting. So I really like the projectors. If you're laying on a soft rabbit fur carpet, you've kicked your feet up and you're watching the stars and aurora lights on the ceiling, and you can hear your favorite song and you have your favorite smell and your jaw is now relaxed and you have the weighted blanket, which feels like a hug. How much quicker do you think your nervous system is able to re-regulate versus sitting in an empty, quiet timeout or decompression room that is typical at the first responders places? Right. So you go from this activated state into this timeout room where there's no input. And I can't imagine that makes people feel better because then you're just stewing in it.
Yeah. You know what? I spent a lot of time in the hospital lately. As I've gotten older, my family's gotten older, and there's been illness and sickness and things like that. So I spent a lot of time in hospitals this year, and I noticed almost every time I walk by, like the family room, which is where often you're not getting good news, the family room is very sterile. So
It's
maybe
terrible.
as I walk by there, maybe it would be better for a family to hear serious news if the room was not so sterile, right? Along the same
Absolutely.
lines?
Yep, that's exactly it. Yeah, and that happens with the first responders. But you're right, and I'm sorry you've been at the hospital. Those places are very hard on your senses because it is sterile. And if you think about it, what else did your brain have to process then? You're in a space where you're getting some terrible news or had a critical incident, and you're sitting there with nothing but your thoughts.
Right.
And it's not a distraction, right? It's added input. Your brain, especially this is where it works so well for first responders, because your brain's used to processing sensory first and foremost as a safety issue. If I add in sensory, you can still have something dramatic thought-wise, right? Critical incident or bad news. But by default, your brain's already been trained to make sure it processes sight and sound and smell and movement. And so now I'm giving your brain all of those to focus on, and it helps take away some of the intensity that might be going on elsewhere internally. Plus, it's helping your nervous system re-regulate, which it's much easier to handle bad news or to have that kind of thing if you're in a space where your nervous system is calm.
That makes sense to me. It really does. So in Florida, there for our listeners, there's 67 counties, and there are counties that there's two sheriff's offices in Florida that are like the two of the five largest sheriff's offices in America, and they have their budgets start with $1 billion. There's also sheriff's offices in Florida with 17 total employees, and of those 17 people, maybe 6 of them carry a gun. So there's this huge disparity because there's a lot of rural. Everybody thinks Florida's palm trees, but it's also a lot of cattle and citrus and agriculture. where I'm
Yeah.
going with that is if I'm a deputy and I'm in a small county and I've been on shift for 12 hours and maybe I worked something stressful, or maybe my mind's just not in the game tonight. What could I do in my patrol car on the cheap to regulate myself? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I love that. And that is important to be able to do it regardless, right? And let's say you're in your patrol car. And something interesting that happens with patrol cars is they know they have the red light so you can do stuff on your laptop. So by default, red light's typically not calming. However, it has the shortest wavelength, so it doesn't last as long. So I've met quite a few first responders who really like the red light. To them, it means that they're in their downtime. But having something even on your phone, like maybe a picture, maybe watching some ocean waves with the blue, maybe turning on the sound of the ocean, having any kind of essential oil with you. And it doesn't even have to be essential oil. My favorite smell actually comes from Florida, but it's from the ET ride at Universal. If you've ever been on the ET ride, it smells lovely in there. But that's one of mine, right? And I have that with me. And having I would start with a warhead, give yourself a loving bitch slap. Just bring yourself back to your senses, and follow it up with your high chews so your jaw relaxes. Do some isometrics, which is just really just tensing up your whole body or every muscle. It's basically isolating one muscle and holding it as tight as you can and letting that go. That will naturally help you breathe. You have the smell that'll help you breathe. And maybe listen to 2 favorite songs that you have.
Okay, so if there's a deputy and she's working by herself in a small county and she could go do that, I mean, because you could put yourself in a safe environment. You could park in a safe place where you could still see out and you're not completely abandoning, your
post,
ulcer safety and things like that. So she could back in and do those things. And then theoretically, what happens to her physiologically and maybe even psychologically after 15 minutes of that?
Absolutely. Yep. So physiologically, your nervous system is going to start to relax. You'll notice your breathing rate will come back to regular. Your heart rate will go down. What happens when those 2 things physically happen is it gives you access back to your frontal lobe. And at that point, things become clear and you're able to get out of kind of that hypervigilance or that worry that kind of happens of tracking everything, right? Kind of that old saying, come back to your senses, was very literal. They literally meant come back to your senses, because once your senses process that physiologically, you'll have access to your logic. And once you have access to your logic, then you can start putting into place, you know what, today's okay. I'm going to go home, and start using all of the logic tools that they do talk about, the resiliency and the gratitude and all of the things that are using that way. But it's really hard to use those mindfulness tools when your nervous system's freaking out.
Right.
And so that's where having that space and giving yourself, going to the bathroom when you get home and spending 10 minutes in the bathroom even, where you get to maybe turn on soft lighting and put on some headphones and listen to your favorite song, have something to eat and drink, have an easy smell maybe you keep with you, and letting that reset so you can get back to your logic and back to your control. And once you have access to your logic brain, things don't feel as dramatic anymore. Even dramatic things feel less dramatic. Kind of like you said, my parents were notorious for that too, of take a deep breath. And I remember hating that because I thought a deep breath meant I was going to feel better. And I was mad, right? I didn't want to feel better. Right. I was angry. So feeling better wasn't something I wanted. So I would take 2 or 3 deep breaths and be like, see, I'm still angry. It's not working. And it wasn't until I was in school that I learned that it was less about, about taking the deep breath, but what the deep breath does is return you to your logic. And once you're in your logic, things become easier. I'll share one of my favorite stories of that. So when I was in school, I was going through a divorce, and my professor had told me to take a deep breath. And especially if I was arguing with my ex-husband. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to like him. I didn't want to talk to him, right? That's the whole point of that. Right. So I didn't want to take a deep breath. And I told her I wouldn't. And she said, why? And I said, because I don't want it to get better. Like I'm angry. And she said, oh no, honey, taking a deep breath isn't going to make it so you like him more. Taking a deep breath is going to make you fight better. Well, then I'm in, right?
Right.
And that's really, even with our mental health, that's the reality of it. Taking a deep breath, smelling a favorite smell, hearing your favorite song, having some movement. it itself does not make you feel better. What it does is regulate your nervous system so you get to come back to being authentically you. And by default, that helps you feel better.
We used to call that back in the day, it was combat breathing or tactical breathing. It didn't really engage, we didn't really engage the other senses, but back in the day when they were really preaching, deputy safety, officer safety, that was one of the first things they would talk about as you're driving to a call. Do that tactical breathing, slow down, get some oxygen in your brain. So you'd go from the lizard part of your brain and start using reason. But the rest of the other 7 senses, nobody ever told us about. It was just about the breath work, and it was only temporary, just on the way to the call. Yeah.
Yeah. Now thinking about that on a way to a call, knowing, and I've had this happen because I've been doing this long enough, and I get to, stay in contact with some of the people that I've worked with, like yourself, which is so lovely. But I've had that happen where they've been headed to a call, and that's exactly what they'll do. The fun thing is someone will pull out a warhead, right? Trying to get to their senses, clear their mind. And someone next to them will be like, oh shit, hand me one of those.
Yeah.
Right. And it's being able to support each other in the moment. And I think that's so beautiful for 2 reasons. One, you're both getting a loving bitch slap, and you're going to come back to the moment. But 2, now you have each other supporting each other, saying right from the get-go, yep, this is going to be difficult and this is going to be dramatic, and let's just get ourselves prepared.
Yeah, fear is contagious, and so is courage. And Absolutely. What you're talking about, changing our senses up and bringing them back to reality, you're bringing more oxygen into the brain. And then if your squad mate sees, hey, he or she's calm, I think subconsciously they'd be like, okay, things are gonna be all right. He or she's not uptight either. We'll get through this.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's already a support system without having to use the language. And I feel like that can be such a big thing for first responders' home life too. Imagine if your spouse said, hey, why are you being an asshole? Why don't you eat 3 high chews and come back? Right? That feels so much more loving.
Yeah. I have been called the a-hole a lot.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah, I would say one of the funniest things is I would probably say I don't know how many people I've worked with now, but one of the most common things I hear when I first meet a first responder to start working is, well, you've never met someone who's such an asshole. And I always laugh and I'm like, well, I don't know you, so maybe. But also, let's just say there's a possibility that your nervous system is so out of whack and you are so overstimulated just internally, doing nothing because your brain is used to processing that quick, that you just don't have the effort it takes to give that 2 seconds that makes it look like you're not an asshole.
Yeah. Now, Bonnie, you travel a lot. You go to a lot of agencies, right? And in your travels, what are some of the things that you travel to do at an agency or a department?
Yeah, thank you. It's one of my favorite passions because I love working in the treatment center and getting to work one-on-one with people, but I feel like these tools are so simplistic and inexpensive and accessible that I love to go out and I love to teach departments how to use it. So I'll bring out all of the things that happen, all of the high chews, warheads, fidgets, smells, and go through and really real life scenarios of, okay, here's a scenario that you're struggling with, like maybe constantly smelling, like you said, on your mustache, or somebody else who's like, I haven't been able to go to the shooting range because everything smells like black powder, and really helping in real life situations learn how to manage that, but also set them up so that it doesn't happen over and over and over again. By the end of your career, and I'm going to share one thing you don't have to expand on, but something as simplistic as a cucumber, right, can throw your nervous system into a activation. Yeah. And so teaching in real time what you can do with that information and how to change it so it's not so effective is a huge thing. So I do love to go out and teach. I love to present. I presented at the CIT International the last 2 years. And Arthur, who is the owner of After Action, he goes and puts in, him and I will go together and we'll actually put in a sensory room for the department. So we'll go in, we'll put in the sensory room so they have access to it, and then I will do a 2-hour training on how to use it. We just came back from Maui and put one in their police department, and they just recorded it because they couldn't get their officers all in the same room at the same time for a training.
Wow. Okay.
So they recorded it, and now anytime someone wants to utilize the sensory room or wants to understand how or why to use it, they just play that tape for new recruits. And I think that's a big thing. Ideally, I really want to see this as part of the training for all first responders right from the get-go. Let's not wait until there's years and years of PTSD. Let's not wait until your hypervigilance things have happened so much that your life's falling apart and you need more help. Let's start from the get-go of getting that support and that understanding so you get to control each situation so it doesn't keep building.
Yeah, I love that because we spent so much time learning how to fight, shoot, drive. We spent some time learning how to talk our way in or out of something with some, de-escalation, but there was never really any self-care back then. And then I want to say today in Florida, the amount that they get on self-care might even be a couple hours. That's it. So that's in the academy, not at an agency.
Right.
We're talking about it, so that's good. I mean, we're talking about it.
That's a huge improvement, as you know.
Yeah. Let me ask you this too. So whether it's Maui or some other agency that you've been to, what about agencies that have lots of precincts or substations? Is there a huge cost? If I was still an administrator and somebody came to me or the chief or the sheriff and they said, hey, we'd like to do this and we'd like to put a space in every precinct or substation, there's really a minimal cost to that, right? I mean, other than the physical space. There really is.
Yeah, and depending, Arthur and After Action likes to do a couple every year just as part of our giving back, right, to the community. So if that's something you're interested in, you can always go to our After Action page and see if that's something that works out. But let's say you're just doing it on your own, or one or two of you want to get, most places will have a lactation or a quiet room.
Yeah.
Both can be used for a sensory space. If you don't want any of the sensory stuff on, don't turn it on. But a $1,200 would be a decked out sensory room, homemade.
Okay.
You could easily spend $50 and put some stuff in there. I mean, weighted blankets now are super inexpensive. LED lights, thanks to teenage girls' bedrooms, have now become super inexpensive, right? And then it's learning how to use that. But adding that and then a diffuser, you've got sight, you've got sound, and you've got smell at your fingertips at all times.
Okay, so that's really good to hear. So again, for our listeners, if you work at a small agency or in Florida, there's a phrase, I think we call it financially or fiscally restrained. I think there's 29 counties that have been designated that way by our governor, and he's gone in and really bolstered the cost of bolstered the standard of living in those counties, especially for first responders. But so you could do this very ineffectively or very economically, and it would have long-term effects on somebody's career.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then the training, right? Like that doesn't take a lot. And even if you're not sure what you're doing, the nice thing about sensory is because sensory is part of survival, you can go in and be like, this isn't doing anything. And you're listening to your song and you've changed the lights and you're having to smell. And the thing is you don't even have to recognize it for the fact that science says it is doing something, right? And even that little bit, let's say you're running around at a level 10 of just hypervigilance and thoughts and stress, and you go into the sensory space, you do just a couple of sensory things, and even if you think it's not happening, even if it just drops it down two little levels because you had a very inexpensive small sensory space, well, that's huge. The difference between going home at a 10 or reacting to a critical incident at a 10 and reacting at an 8 is still a huge life-changing thing. And if you do that every day, day after day, you're talking about a different outcome for a lot of first responders.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And let me say this too. So again, this is not just for sworn people, right? There's this whole line of demarcation. Hey, that's for sworn only. This is for any human being, right? Any
Correct.
Human being would benefit from this type of sensory therapy. So if I was a chief or a sheriff somewhere and I were to start sensory therapy or create a sensory room, it should be for everybody.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you said that because my passion is working with first responders because I feel like they need it the most and it's going to be the easiest accessible. But someone asked me once, like, who is sensory good for? And I said, well, the easiest way to check is go look in the mirror. And if you're human, it's for you. Yeah. Because by default, humans respond to sensory. That is one of our main integrated survival reactions for all of human history. So It works for everyone. And I feel like first responders get an overstimulus of too much input. So I wanted to start with that first. But really, this is something that you take home to your family, that you take home and you utilize in all aspects of life, sworn, not sworn. any human it's going to benefit.
I look at a lot of, I'm sure it's this way all over the place, but for me, only as I got older and had been around the block a few more times in law enforcement did I realize the importance of the support staff. Yes, we might be out there doing cool stuff, but we couldn't do it without the support staff. And the support staff goes through those critical incidents with us. They might not be on the scene, but they hear about it, they think about it, they're dispatching it, they hear the call come in, they're processing the evidence, things like that. So it's super important from where I sit on this planet now that to make sure that everybody in the realm of first responders knows that we all go through this together, and
Absolutely.
the benefits should be for everybody. Especially, but my heart is really pouring out for telecommunicators and dispatchers now, because that is just a wickedly stressful job. I mean, the stress level for those folks is sometimes it's just insipid. They can't get away from it. As a patrol guy, I could stop at a 7-Eleven and go in and get a drink or a snack or a dip or a high chew or something and take a few minutes and bullshit with the clerk and let it go. But for a telecommunicator, the phone keeps ringing, the radio keeps going off. It's really hard to step away and unplug. So I think this would be really good for them as well.
I agree. I also think about with the telecommunication, a lot of times other first responders get to know the outcome of whatever it was that was happening, and that's not always the case for them. And so just the way the human brain works is part of it is we like to close a loop on it. And if you don't have the closure to something, your brain is going to make up every scenario. So even going home, there's that possibility for an operator to go home and have 12 different stories that they're trying to close the loop to.
Right.
And that amount of your brain just going all the time is another piece of that. So learning to even utilize those things in the moment as they're at their desk, as they're at answering phone calls, and being able to take that, it would be a huge difference, I feel.
Yeah. And again, listeners, we did an episode probably 4 episodes ago, maybe 5, with Director David Odom at the Tallahassee Consolidated Dispatch Agency. And this is one of the things we talked about was the thread through our conversation was wellness. It's not just recruiting, but it was retaining the people that come on and take on this special role. So that's good, Bonnie. Hey, in our last few minutes, what words of advice would you give for somebody who's looking or thinking about how to de-stress their life and how this type of therapy, sensory therapy, could help?
Yeah, I love that. And I would start with the exploration piece of what makes you take that deep breath, what helps you take that deep breath a little bit easier, and using some of the apps that can walk you through it. Anytime you look for something that says somatic, so like you can use Calm or Headspace or Insight Timer, right? And sometimes having someone else lead you through it, especially early on, I feel is really beneficial. If you're anything like me and most of the people I work with, our brains work really quickly and I lose track of my own thoughts half the time. So having someone else lead me through that. So look for something that says sensory, look for something that says grounding, look for something that says somatic. All of that is going to be based in your body. Body scan is great. That's another one to start at. Just feeling where you're at in that moment. Anything with mindfulness will be a huge help. And then add to that. Find out what you like. And there's a lot of them out there I've listened to and I don't like. And there's a lot of things out there that I'm like, yeah, that's just not for me. And that's okay. The whole point of it is what is for you. And you making sure that you have that available and accessible and so you can use it when you need it, versus waiting for something to activate you and then run around with a chicken with your head cut off trying to figure out, now what do I do? So I would say my advice is to spend at least 15 minutes a day. You could break it up, 1 minute here, 5 minutes there, but 15 minutes a day of really getting a chance to get in your body and out of your head.
Okay.
And if you can't get in your body, that's where you can start using sensory, and it will help put you back in your body.
Yeah, and again, the name of our podcast is A Tactical Pause. It's to take that tactical pause, whether it's you're a SWAT commander and you're trying to figure out what really is going on here. Take a deep breath and take that pause and go, okay. But it's also could be you're working midnights in the middle of a small county and you need to take a pause, and this is a good way to do it as well. Right?
Absolutely.
So, Bonnie, if somebody wanted to reach out to you for more questions about what you do, or maybe after action, do you have a webpage or an email address somebody you could direct them to?
Absolutely. Yeah, both. So our webpage, and it'll say sensory modulation. So it's afteraction.care. And that will be the webpage. And then look for anything with sensory modulation. You can see the pictures of the sensory room. It'll have some advice on there. My email, feel free to reach out. It's really simplistic. It's bonnieamhealthcare.org.
Bonnie at amhealthcare.org.
Yes. And also LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to help any way that there is. So even if it's just needing some extra advice or some extra tools, or when I present, a lot of people want to know where I get things and what to look up. So happy to share any of that with anyone who's willing to take some extra time for their department, for themselves. I'm here to support that.
And I know it's your passion. It bubbles through you. You were you and Shelley, who was also a guest early on our podcast, were two of the people that were immediately transparent. And I'm like, okay, they're for me. So I'm grateful for you and your attitude and your passion. So thank you. Thanks, Bonnie, for coming on today too.
Thanks for having me. And John, thank you for everything you do. I love the podcast you've been on. I love listening to your podcast. And I'm just so grateful that so many people get to hear you and your experience and your viewpoint. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, Bonnie. It's been quite a journey. I'm thankful. Thank you for listening to The Tactical Pause, the official podcast of the Florida Deputy Sheriff's Association. FDSA proudly serves over 25,000 deputy sheriffs across the state with legal benefits, vital training, and financial assistance in times of need. You can listen to previous episodes at fldeputisheriffs.org or wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave us a review and encourage your friends, coworkers, and those in the law enforcement community to listen as well. To learn more about the Florida Deputy Sheriff's Association and how we serve those who serve, visit our website at fldeputisheriffs.org.